and welcome and thank you for joining this little pre-event or session before the Big Bang tomorrow. We are very excited here at the Copenhagen Fintech Lab in our own little studio here. So last year, when the world looked quite differently, we had a delegation to going to Singapore Fintech Festival. And one of the events we did there, one of the fringe events we did, was actually around the theme of ethical AI. And we received extremely positive feedback from that one, and thought we would like to repeat that concept, broaden it a little bit, but do it again here at the Copenhagen Fintech Week Global Edition. So with me today, I have a number of panelists. First of all, I have Professor Hannah Ye Phin Lim from NTU in Singapore. Hannah has a background in computer science and is also an internationally recognized legal scholar in technology and internet law, intellectual property, e-commerce, data protection, and privacy. Good evening, Hannah. I believe it is good evening, right? Hi. I also have Søren Juhl Jørgensen with me from Silicon Valley and Stanford. And I think for you, Søren, it's more of good morning, very early morning.
It's early Monday morning. Good morning.
Morning. And Søren has previously headed the Danish Innovation Center in Palo Alto. He was the CEO and the Consul General of Denmark to Silicon Valley. And Søren is now working on a very exciting project around ethics, law, and tech, and how organization may be ethically compliant in their dealings with tech and data. And with me in the studio here, actually, I have Bjørn Prøvs, external lecturer and researcher at Copenhagen Business School. And Bjørn is also a senior data scientist at 2021. But more on that. Welcome, Bjørn.
Thank you.
So I want to start out and kick this session off with a little bit of an introduction to you guys, and I'll let you do that. Maybe Hannah, you can give an introduction to what kind of why you're doing what you're doing, what kind of research you're looking into, so our audience learn a little bit more about you.
Okay, look, thanks very much, Thomas, for the very kind invitation to be on this panel, and it's my great pleasure to be here. I'm actually Australian. I've been working in Singapore for about 13 years now, and as you mentioned earlier on, I do have a background in computer science. So I was actually trained as a computer scientist and a lawyer, but I gave up on a computer science a long time ago, and mostly all my work over the past 3 decades has been dealing with cutting-edge technology and the legal aspects and the regulation and the ethics of such technology. So my research has pretty much spanned the entire information technology evolution and development of the past 3 decades. And all my research is very interdisciplinary in nature, mainly because of my background, having the 2 backgrounds in computer science and law. And in terms of my research, I've written 6 books and hundreds of papers, and they are really indicative of what the love of my life, which is really technology and with law. My very first book was published back in 2002 by Oxford University Press, and it was just simply called Cyberspace Laws, because that was just the birth of the World Wide Web, and that actually raised many, many new legal issues. And my most recent book was published in 2018, and it was on autonomous vehicles and the law. And but it also encompasses technology and algorithms and the ethics side as well. And in this particular book, as part of my research, I basically reverse engineered how self-driving cars work in terms of the hardware and the software and the AI. And then from there, I propose a model of ethics drawing on virtue ethics philosophy. And it also turns out to be a model for regulation as well. And in between, I've done a lot of work, a lot of research on data privacy, data ethics, and a number of big data projects. And I've also published a book on GDPR as well. Currently, I'm working on a number of AI-related projects that looks at the practical applications of ethical AI, like the ethics issues of AI in healthcare. And I also have a couple of projects in fintech and regtech, legal and regulatory and ethics frameworks as well. So yeah, I'm kept pretty busy. As the technologies are busy, I have to keep up with them. Thanks, Thomas.
Great to have you here, and you were a great inspiration for all the participants at our previous events in Singapore. So it's really good to have you here. I'll jump to you, Søren, and could you give the audience a little bit of information about what the project you're running now, who's involved, the objective, and also why it matters?
Sure, thanks, and thanks very much for this invitation. So really happy to be here. And so we're working on a project on how to be to continue on exactly what you just said, how to be very concrete in these ethical guidelines and challenges. So we're working with a group of banks and insurance companies from mainly Europe. In Denmark, it's companies like Spar Nord, Nykredit, the Norwegian DNB Bank, Swedbank from Sweden, the German insurance company Generali, and Maif from France, and as well as recently a number of additional banks, DBS from Singapore and Sony Corporation and a few others. That are joining this project, and so the core of it is to look at how you implement all the ethical guidelines that are emerging into concrete business. So we are looking at governance models, and we're looking at the guidelines, and as one of the participants has termed it, the sort of the cookbook of how to approach these challenges. And we're looking at all the good work that has emerged globally, and we're trying to make it very concrete in a financial sector setting. And what we realized along the way, which is the reason for sort of the imminent launch of a new project in relation to this, is that you can have all the guidelines and governance measures you need, and you definitely need that. But end of the day, what it really boils down to is very much sort of the attitude and the culture of the organization and the ability to learn. So we're about to launch a project in collaboration with the companies that I mentioned, and a global group of students, PhD, master level students from currently 17 countries, where we will look at the sort of very concrete use cases and very concrete dilemmas that this raises, and make what we call a library of dilemmas, because we think that such a repository or such a book of well-described concrete dilemma of what might happen, what might go wrong, is an important basis for learning and development in organizations. So the idea is that through this platform, we'll develop better learning and better understanding, and help to promote that in organizations, so that engineers and business people and everyone else working with tech, the use of data in business, will better understand how this might impact negatively, and how to relate to that.
Great, sounds very exciting. So I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more about that. I'll jump here in the studio to you, Bjørn, and could you give a short introduction to the work you're doing at 2021, and also some of the research you have been doing for the last couple of years?
Absolutely, thank you, Thomas. I also thank you for having me here. Yeah, exactly. So I'm on the one side associated with 2021 AI. So what we do is we aim to put machine learning models into production, and through that have a really strong focus on all the ethics and governance around that. So we saw that especially in the financial sector, this is really important to give companies a framework to enable them to track certain things when they run machine learning in operations. So, and on the 2021 AI side, I'm responsible for the data science delivery. So I'm a senior data scientist there. So I'm really there in the focus on how to do that on a practical base. And besides that, I'm also associated, as you mentioned, with CBS. There I'm with the Department of Economics, Business and Government. as well as with the Center of Corporate Governance. And in that center, I'm participating on a couple of research projects, where one was titled Nordic Finance and the Good Society, where we looked on whether Nordic institutions have certain aspects that help them to be more sustainable in the way they operate, and to see if one can learn something from these institutions, and then see, well, do we have a competitive advantage in the Nordics? Now, and in that research project, I'm now working on a paper that looks more into if you want to use machine learning models in financial settings, so for example, risk management, some anti-money laundering models, how can you then use certain statistical approaches to measure bias, to measure the impact it has, and whether there are ethical issues arising from that.
All right, great. So I'm gonna get back to that. But before I do that, I want to zoom in a little bit on, because I think you're all three talking about the arising ethical dilemmas there is, and some of the challenges that will be some of the challenges that leaders will face in the future. So let me maybe jump to you, Søren, because that's some of the research or some of the work that you're doing now, and I'm a little bit curious. So what do you think will be the most interesting ethical dilemmas that is facing the financial services industry? I know that's a broad and a large question, but your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So thank you for that broad question. And as you say, I think actually the main point is that there are really many, and they're in a highly dynamic setting where it's difficult to understand the potential risk of the tools that we use, and that's really the challenge. They are wicked problems, really. So technology enables very large or massive impact, and that's good. It gives us the ability to provide better and more individualized services, reduce costs, and be much more effective. And often we can even expect and we can make better decisions by reducing human bias. But we've also realized the risks led to privacy, to control, agency, and fairness. And so the key thing, I think, is that we adopt the way we work to an ethics by design approach, and that this is very much a question of, as said, learning and developing organizations realizing those challenges. And I think a good example of that is the sort of this dynamic environment and this challenge and the risk that this entails is the story of the sexiest credit card launched in 2019. Of course, the well-known Apple Goldman Sachs card that turned out not to be the sexiest credit card, but the most sexist because it had bias and discriminated against women in the credit, and that just underlines the general risk in this area. So I think there are several layers of these dilemmas. There's a top level which is sort of more abstract. Explainability as an example. So at one end, sort of favoring effective decisions regardless. They come out of a black box versus the obvious right to understand and challenge or contest even the decisions that impact us. You have the challenge of securing transparency, which also has some element of risk in providing transparency for the organization, and then fairness. Alone the fact or the challenge that there are at least 40 kinds of fairness, and as an example, the dilemma relating to fairness in insurance, where new use of data will challenge solidarity, but enables the individual and the individual perception of fairness. So this relation between individual and the many. Similarly in banking is of course the use of data to predict risk and provide much better services, perhaps offering better credit in marginal areas through massive use of data, risking privacy. And then you have a high number of concrete challenges or dilemmas in relation to concrete business cases, such as privacy breaches, bias, constraints on the individual choice and agency. And these are all relevant in areas in relation to areas such as robo advisory and new forms of payments. And then you have all the classical risks of automation, how automation impacts customer relations, customer agency, and the risk that financial advisors even become disengaged or lethargic in their advice. And then, of course, the dilemmas which will impact us all also coming out of COVID in the automation out of the sort of economic crisis. The dilemma sort of relating to your own workforce when you implement AI, will you or the dilemma in perhaps laying off groups of people and potential societal impact in this area. And then on that sort of HR area, the financial sector will of course also see a number of dilemmas. A recent one I came across relates to using AI and monitoring tools to make better use of office space, perhaps reduce or simply do that, which of course can have gains for organizations, but also has the aspect of surveillance and monitoring, just as you would have in security settings, for instance, around an ATM situations. And then we haven't touched all the dilemmas relating to security, identity theft, control, fraud, manipulation, and all that. So the list is quite long.
Long line of dilemmas. Can I ask you just? I'll stay with you just 30 seconds more. Can I ask you what do you actually mean by ethics by design or trust by design or?
The fact that organizations use sort of iterative development loops and iterative processes in their development, and that you think in or that you implement thoughts relating to ethics very early in your design process, so that you don't sort of end of the day realize that you've made a problem, then you have to solve it, but that you consider those aspects from the very beginning when you develop products. Right. I think that's really important, and that's actually core of how we manage this, develop the way we work.
Cool. And I'm going to jump to you now, because I know that you have been doing a lot of research, and two subjects that are very close to your heart are privacy and data protection. And I think that's some of the dilemmas that Søren also talked about here. So what's your take on that specifically, but also more broader, some of the important dilemmas that was raised here?
Yeah, I mean, I also think that it's one of the biggest ethical dilemmas facing our time is the use of data. And I mean, if you allow me to indulge a little bit, people like using the phrase that data is the new oil. I actually think that is a really unhelpful analogy, because oil is non-renewable. It's a non-renewable resource, and it's non-sustainable. So, I mean, I would like to give a better analogy, and I would say that data is like the new air, because air, it doesn't get diminished when we use it, and it's still hanging around, And data, you see, can be used and reused by many people, often without the knowledge of the, other people. And they don't even need to be in the same space as you. So in that sense, the use of data is more insidious than the use of air. But like air, data provides sustenance for living. And so we're obviously talking about data providing sustenance for the life of AI systems and much of fintech as well. Because, fintech to a smaller or a larger extent will handle, use or process data at some stage, whether personal data or non-personal data. But with a very, very broad definition of what constitutes personal data that has been adopted by legislation in many countries for 3 decades now, a lot of seemingly non-personal data can constitute personal data. And of course, the mother of all these legislation is the current GDPR and its predecessor, the EU Data Protection Directive, that was adopted in 1995. And both of these actually set very high standards for the protection of personal data. And this is where the use of data will clash with privacy as well as other rights of individuals, like non-discrimination and bias and some of the things that Søren has already mentioned. But, I also agree with Søren that, whilst data protection and data privacy laws have been in place since 1980 to ensure ethical principles are followed, it is one thing to have the laws and guidelines in the textbooks and in the law books, but it's quite another to make sure that there is compliance with the laws. So going forward with big data and AI and the use of data in fintech, it will really require really super close scrutiny. So I mean, as a software engineer in my prior life, I definitely agree with Soren that during the developmental stages of fintech, there must be best practices on data that should be adopted and followed. I mean, we call them privacy by design or data protection by design, privacy by default. This is the lingo that we've been using for the last 30 years, those of us in data protection. But the problem is that this kind of approach cannot be tackled by the technologists alone, because they need to understand all the data ethics principles and how to implement them, which actually, whilst you can teach them to the technologists, they actually really need advisors working hand in hand with them to design and to implement. And of course, there are a lot of issues with the use of data sets in AI, but even, if we look at non-AI technologies, there's already many ethical issues that need to be considered. So in many cases, fintech will be handling financial information, which on the whole is legally considered as sensitive information and has been considered sensitive information for many decades in many, many jurisdictions. So this type of data being sensitive information needs to be highly secured and protected. And frankly, some of the consumer-based fintech initiatives that sit on mobile phones may have very serious data security flaws if you actually care to look. So it's really about having people to audit these systems. So I think one really major data ethics area that needs to be given high priority in the coming years is the security of fintech, because I think much focus is on getting the thing to work, getting the product to work, getting the system to work, to get results. But security is kind of like forgotten, and I think that is a serious issue. And I guess the other area of data ethics that needs to be seriously looked into is the accuracy of the data, because a lot of the times the data is not clean. It is often old or outdated or simply plain wrong. But yet it is used to the detriment of both the organization using it as well as the individuals about which the data is concerning. So I think that using data that is not clean is actually a huge ethical problem, especially if individuals are adversely affected by decisions, whether it's things like approval of loans or credit ratings or in insurance products, or even in modeling algorithms that are used in fintech. And I think, lastly, and overarching everything else, the type and the kind of data used in fintech and how they are used calls into question a lot of data ethics and considerations like bias and discrimination, because a lot of times you have a lot of variables in there that shouldn't be in the system in the first place. So yeah, that's my take. Thanks.
Great. So I'll actually turn to you, Bjørn, because I think that bridges quite nicely into what some of the things that you're actually working with. And so Søren raised the issue with all the dilemmas, and Hannah, some of the challenges there actually are with concerning data, and as a data scientist, but also as a researcher, I know you've done a lot of things in that field, and you actually also represent a platform that, at least to some extent, handles some of these dilemmas or challenges, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that the points that were raised are actually quite important to address. If we nowadays look on organizations, look on banks, but also fintechs that gain more and more market share, it's quite important to address these issues if they want to use technology in their operations. And on the you could say the business side, what we do is we build such a platform which helps to transform these technical measures of ethics, but also bringing a segregation of duties and all these kind of control tools into one place, so it enables basically the organization to fulfill these requirements in the best sense. And on that note, we have also worked with the EU Commission or we gave suggestions to EU Commission for making these assessments or designing these guidelines around AI controls and AI governance. On the other side, you mentioned I'm also partly at least researcher. So then when you have this tooling, then obviously the next question that comes along is what kind of leadership, what kind of management style do we need in an organization? How do we need to lead an organization so that we can adopt these technologies and these tools in the best way, so that we are not holding back? And I think there research is also indicating that certain values that we share here in the Nordics, like flat hierarchies, quite openness towards change and flexibility, are values that not only in general business settings and in a changing business environment, but also in these questions could help to adopt new ways of doing things. And
all right, so I want to go to you, Søren and Hannah, and kind of from many years of working in the financial services industry, you can say you've been used to looking at the regulation and find kind of what's right, what's wrong. So it provided a clear framework for should I turn left or should I turn right? Now we're talking about ethical dilemmas and something where there isn't necessarily a clear answer. I would like to, Bjørn already started a bit here, but get your take on it. What is required for top leadership or management in big financial institutions or fintechs today to actually lead and manage their organization and make decision around some of these challenges and dilemmas? Maybe start out with you, Hannah.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, for me, and definitely this is a trend that I'm in a business school, so we are actually in the business of training these youngsters. But for quite a number of years now, we are seeing that banks will probably not just take our banking and finance graduates or even just banking graduates, but they'll also take technologists and IT folks and philosophers and whatnot. So we, at my school, at my university, we've actually embarked on a very huge interdisciplinary program so that even our banking and finance major students, they will actually know how to become data scientists. Like we actually teach them skills in data sciences, and they know how to program, for example, in Python, in R, and in the basics, so that when they go out there in the workforce, they are actually wanted and needed and be useful to the leadership.
Okay, so I think that's super interesting, right? Because as a banking executive or fintech executive today, how much code should you actually understand? To make it very concrete.
Sorry?
So as an executive in a big bank or as a fintech, how much code, how much technical skills should you actually have or would be required in the future?
For me, I don't think that you would need a lot in terms of technical skills, but you would certainly need to know how it works and why it works, and definitely the risks and the limitations. To me, that would be the benchmark. That is the minimum, because as I always tell my colleagues, we're not here to turn every single banking and finance or business graduate into a data scientist. We're here so that they can work in partnership with their bosses and with their colleagues who come from core other disciplines who are real data scientists. So I think, we need to draw the line of, how much do we require them to know, but definitely they need to know enough to understand how it works and what are the risks and what are the limitations, and to be able to tap on it, because they are the ones who are going to be in charge or will be in charge in terms of the banking environment or the business environment.
All right, so I'm going to jump to you, Søren. So in our preparation, we talked a lot about, top leadership, senior management, gaining a better understanding. Can you elaborate a bit on that? What's your view?
Yeah, thanks. And this is extremely important, and the future of leadership is definitely challenging. Because there are so many roles and areas you have to fit into in this super complicated landscape, sort of guiding and leading and supporting and developing organizations to learn and understand that is difficult. So I think this interdisciplinary approach is really important. I think there are two key words, and also, as you said, I think One is the ability to be. I think what you're looking for is tech savvy, not an expert, but an understanding and of as you say the implications of technology, and the other is diversity. To a very large degree, that we understand that diversity is a key to innovation and development, but is also a key to understanding these challenges. So promoting that at leadership and at top leadership is important. Not just the CEO. I think an important factor here is the board and those instances. And I mean, we know that tech-savvy boards or companies that have tech-savvy boards benefit from digitalization to a larger extent, and I think it's important to underline the importance of the board also in relation to data ethics and in their ability to sort of control and master and develop those organizations, and that includes, of course, also diversity to the largest extent possible. At board level, gender, but all kinds of other levels of diversity, of course, in promoting the ability to understand the challenges and the risks ahead, and in being able to support the kind of leadership which is really sort of encompassing and understands how to drive those open organizations, enabling organizations that you also mentioned, Bjørn.
Great. So I want to talk a little bit about what you started talking about also, Bjørn, because you mentioned a bit that maybe there is a special leadership model in the Nordics that might be not better, but at least differently ready for approaching some of these dilemmas or challenges. So what would you say is the Nordics, better off from the beginning because we have another culture, another model, or what's your take on that? And maybe I'll jump to you afterwards, Søren and Hannah.
Well, yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I mean, what we can see, not only based on AI now or technology, but generally we can see that when we look at the Nordic leadership style, I mean, the style is, from a business perspective, much more stakeholder value oriented, much broader, and also much more open towards new things. So and that's, I think, also why we see the adoption of these new technologies. If we look now, US, China, and then Europe. Well, US and China are obviously on the forefront, but if we look on Europe, we can see that the adoption of AI now, or all these data science, the usage of these technologies is on a much higher level there in the Nordics than in other countries in Europe. And I think here this openness towards technology, that's a key thing for adopting this. And on the other side, I think that the fact that we see much more flat hierarchies when we research leadership in the Nordics, I think that could be a quite interesting aspect if we now look actually on these points, that the understanding data science, right, which is more done on the ground floor, on the operations often, right, transferring that to top leadership to the board. I think that's maybe a positive concept that we see here in the Nordics, that when we foster that more, when we work more with that, then we might end up in a quite good position also in terms of policy design, or helping to guide other institutions or countries on that.
So just jumping to you, Søren, because you have a leg in each camp, so to speak, both in the US and in Denmark and the Nordics. So what's your take on that? Is that does that hold up, or is it actually something we just tell ourselves to feel better?
No, I think maybe we do, but it has a benefit. It's also true that I think the challenge might be scaling it to very large organizations, of course. But I think I agree. I think it's very important. I think it's that kind of enabling leadership that develops and supports transparency in organizations, which is sort of that kind of trust, which makes it possible for people to say to say it when they realize that something might go wrong. I mean, whistleblowers are good and important, but it's also fine that we have organizations, or important that we have organizations where people actually say when they realize that something is going wrong, and that whole leadership model and that whole sort of organizational development is of course key to ethics by design and developing that kind of an environment where you have good design, good product, but also support that people raise a flag when there's need to do that.
All right. So
that's
thanks, Hannah. From your perspective, and I think I'll add another dimension to this. You know, obviously from Denmark and even the Nordics, a very small country, but also a small region, and then jump to Singapore. And is there anything we can, as small countries, does it actually really matter? How is there a movement we can lead, or how do we play a role?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and I'll just give you one example of this creature called the ASEAN Financial Innovation Network, which is shortened to AFIN. I mean, it's basically a non-profit organization that was a number of parties, but one of the parties to the foundation was the Monetary Authority of Singapore, which is the MAS, the regulator here. And basically, the AFIN's objective is to really support experimentation and collaboration between the financial institutions and the fintech service providers, so that you can promote greater financial innovations. But also, and this is very big also, to support the less developed markets within the ASEAN regions and and even beyond the ASEAN regions to drive financial inclusion. And I think to put things into perspective for our audience who may not be aware, recent studies have shown that Southeast Asia consumers actually have less access to financial services than their peers in developed markets. So like the banking penetration here is still only about 50% on average, compared with about 95%, I think, in the US and the UK. And I think the most recent study that came out late last year was that 7 out of 10 adults in Southeast Asia are either underbanked, meaning, for example, that they have no access to credit cards or have no long-term saving products, or that they are unbanked, meaning that they have no access to a basic bank account. So, and in addition to that, there's a lot of millions of Southeast Asia SMEs that face large funding gaps. So basically what that means is within ASEAN, there is actually a huge growth potential to develop the finance services industry and fintech. And so this is why AFIN was created. MAS is one of the founding partners, as I said. The other partners are ASEAN Bankers Association and the World Bank's IFC. And to date, I mean, it was only created in 2017, very late in 2017. And in 2018, they actually launched this platform, the API exchange platform. And it's actually the world's first cross-border API marketplace and sandbox platform for collaboration between fintechs and financial institutions. And it's cross-country, which means that, somebody in Thailand and Singapore, they can collaborate. And as these two countries actually have standardized QR codes for mobile payments to increase the efficiency of their financial services. So I think in that respect, it's about looking at the needs and just taking the lead. I don't think size really matters.
Good to know. So maybe staying a little bit with you, Hannah, because I was thinking you mentioned the MAS and the regulators in general. So what role do you see they have to play in this discussion around ethics? And is it something that you can just regulate and then it's pretty much done, or how do you see this?
Oh no! I mean, in terms of regulation here, the regulator actually reaches out to a lot of the financial institutions and the fintech players, and there are a lot of consultations that goes on. And definitely there was these principles for AI, acronym FEAT, F-E-A-T, which are basically all the things that Søren mentioned earlier on, fairness, ethics, and all that. And they were developed. But I mean, it's those kind of principles have actually been around in many countries. But the trick is in how to implement them. And I think they're working on that right now.
And from the talks you have, and that's maybe a question to all three of you, from the many talks you have with different financial institutions, what are the main challenges in actually implementing some of these guidelines? Because I know that Denmark just introduced some regulation around ethical AI, right? EU has some guidelines. You mentioned what is being done in Singapore. So what are the challenges that the industry have in actually implementing those?
Yeah, maybe I can start there. So I mean, besides actually, first of all, the challenge to just implement the model, right, which is still there. So we think quite ahead with that. But I think that one challenge to overcome here definitely is to, do this running through these assessments in a transparent way. Bringing the knowledge that you have on an operative level in an aggregated way to top management. So if you look on these assessments and the suggestions that policymakers have here that you need to track and that you need to be aware of, we can see that there are quite a lot of technical points, and so I think there it's quite important that there is a system that enables these assessments to aggregate it and to inform management in an aggregated way about the compliance of the models and of the systems running there. So yeah.
Because I think you have these large organizations with where in time many hundreds or even thousands of different models and algorithms are just running continuously. So how do you actually monitor that and create that transparency and explainability and I don't know, Hannah, what's your take on that? Because I think that's a very low practical, but that's one of the main challenges, right?
Yeah, it is a main challenge. I mean, I just call it speaking the same language. And this is why I think that we need to have a lot more people working in the industry that actually have dual disciplinary background. I mean, for me, I can say to a technologist, okay, make something that is fair, but they have no idea what is meant by fair. And you need actually a lawyer or an ethicist or a philosopher to explain to them their own understanding of what is fair. And even between a philosopher and a lawyer and an ethicist, the meaning of fair is different. So it's like trying to get everybody to speak the same language. And one of the first ways of doing it is to have people train in multidisciplines, because I know I have a hard time talking to the technologists, but I mean, I understand their technology. So I can imagine those who are lawyers who cannot understand the technology and how it works. Imagine them trying to explain to a data scientist, well, this is not fair. And the two of them are like, one is talking apples, the other one's talking oranges. So they don't know what each other's saying. So I think it's a question of having the same base language. And that's why I think it helps by having some sort of interdisciplinary background in terms of training or postgraduate training and so on.
So you will actually start seeing more traditional educated bankers also with a deeper, at least, understanding of technology and maybe even data science.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's been more than 30 years since I graduated, but the people who is walking around with computer science and law background nowadays is still very, very few. And I think there really needs, this is the time, this is the decade where you really need a lot more of them. And I'm just really surprised that the numbers have not grown since 30 years ago.
And so maybe actually, because Bjørn is representing a technology or a platform and technology that kind of governs AI and the algorithms and the different models. So is this actually, as you see it, and again, this might be a question for all three of you, is this a new category of regulatory technology that we are seeing? And what are some of, I guess, that raises another dilemma, what do we do with technology that actually governs technology or kind of monitors technology?
Maybe first of all, so what we do as for now, right? And now one could in a philosophical way expand that, obviously, but for now what we deliver is a system that enables the organization to, you could say, keep track of all the 10, 100,000 models they are running. So they're able to oversee all this complexity that is introduced by these models, and by that, obviously, also they can take the the operative detailed information on an aggregated level and communicate that. So actually I would, at the moment at least, it's more that the system helps people to control the system, right, or to control the models. So one could now obviously on a philosophical way expand and say, what is if at one point a model is controlling other models? I think then we enter a quite different discussion on risk also in that, right? But as for now, we just give a tool that encapsulates this complexity and makes it understandable and controllable, and with that hopefully reduce the risk in this. Right?
But I think when we talked again in the preparation, Hannah, you mentioned that already now, and I think you used an example from Singapore, from one of the startups that is actually, using AI to control AI or to monitor AI. Isn't that right?
It's using AI to create AI. That is an entity that I am associated with. And then the government here has also, the MAS has also been working on exactly what Bjorn just said, basically trying to have tools that can help the regulator and also the organization itself to ensure that they are complying with certain, at least, benchmark. So for example, if you are using an algorithm that has variables that should not be in there, for example, somebody's race or gender or age, for example, then at least there is some way of tracking the technology that you're using with technology.
So maybe, Søren, a question for you, and I'm thinking about, when should we start appointing a CEO, a chief ethical officer? And should it be a lawyer, maybe like yourself, or a data scientist like Björn, or both?
Well, I think we should start to do that now, and I think it's actually important to develop that kind of ownership within organizations. I think the risk of appointing a chief ethics officer is, of course, that by doing that, you think you sort of solve the issue of the problem, and then he or she will take care of all the ethical challenges, and then that's that. That's of course not the case. And it's important to be conscious of that risk, but I think it is important to develop or to embed sort of the kind of ownership in organizations to drive this development. And I think for that reason, it is important to have an ethics officer. It's a challenging role because it's a role where you exactly have to be a translator. We've talked very much about the emergence of new sort of new functions and roles of the trainers, explainers, and sustainers in organizations, and the chief ethical officer probably has to sort of integrate all of these things. So I think this exactly sort of duality in educational background or the tech savviness or the understanding of that. So if it is a lawyer, and lawyers are always good to hire, of course, but if it is a lawyer, it should be a lawyer with a tech background and understanding of that. And I think that is more important and going forward, that those sort of skills and knowledge of specific areas are more important than the actual faculty he or she comes from. But yes, we need to start looking at how we integrate this work and this responsibility into the organizations in order to drive this development and in order to secure that organizations actually learn and are able to develop this. So chief ethical officers are a starting point. I think you probably also have to have sort of committees or sort of an organizational setup to support that work and to support that it doesn't become sort of a very lonely position of the chief ethical officer having to be the sort of the odd he or she out all the time, crying wolf and taking that challenging role, but that there's actually organizational support and someone to share the burden with.
All right. So actually, yesterday I was made aware that and I posted that on LinkedIn, a quote from Milton Friedman, because it was 50 years ago that he wrote his article, and I'm just going to quote him now here. Milton Friedman said, "There's one and only one social responsibility of businesses: to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits, so long as it stays within the rules of the game. which is to say engages in open and free competition without deception or fraud. So my question to you guys is, so the cynics will probably say that this still holds true, and we should not and cannot assume that any businesses are altruistic or have morals, and if we do so, it's an illusion. So they would argue that we really need some tight regulation to actually handle this. So what would be your take on that? Maybe I'll start with you, Bjørn.
Well, I think exactly like you say, right? That's also a bit the whole discussion you can have. Should we more have a stakeholder or shareholder value approach, and is one non-encapsulated in the other one? And I think from a research perspective, we have not really solved that for now, right? For the Nordics, we can say in the way we teach here that we would more lean towards the stakeholder value approach, right? But one could obviously also argue that, well, in terms of creating really long-term shareholder value, yeah, which is, I think, what Friedman kind of address or tries to address here, is that you need to encapsulate all the needs of all other stakeholders in order to create long-term shareholder value. And one is then obviously to be compliant, to have it anchored on this ethics and ethics discussion on the board level, to ensure that the shareholders' interest of being compliant, obviously to create value, is there and is managed.
So what do you say, Hannah? So right now we publish guidelines and to some extent there's some regulation around that, but can we trust the big financial institutions and the fintechs to figure it out themselves?
No, absolutely not. And I think, really, I think we need to look at the whole ecosystem, and you have to look at the whole ecosystem in what is the traditional sustainability model, which is looking after people, planets, and profits. So you cannot just look at profits in silo, because Milton Friedman might as well just be living on an island by himself with his own little business, which nobody visits. Because if you actually have a business that does not look after the people, whether it's your own employees or the people around the business, then it will eventually fail. It's a matter of time. Similarly, if you don't look after the environment, similarly, your business will fail. So to me, it's the same thing when you convert that into the fintech industry. I mean, billions really have been spent in the last 10 years on fintech investment. If all that money is gone down the drain through no regulation or no proper enforcement, then I think the reaction from the general individuals, the general public, is going to be worse, and the whole fintech industry will just take a nosedive far sooner than it can actually even rise up.
Thanks. Søren, a quick comment, and then I think we'll actually take some questions from the audience. But a quick comment, Søren.
Yeah. So I agree wholeheartedly, which has just been said. I mean, there are so many signals that Milton Friedman is actually dead. So and that the world is different. And I agree. So I think, and I also agree that legislation is really important. Industry needs that kind of support. Alone for the fact that we need a level playing field and we need more international standards. And I think that's sort of the challenges of interpretation and sort of different standards are super important, and these transactions are more and more global. We have sort of data flowing across borders, so it's really important that we develop international understandings of this, and there are really many good places to look. I agree. Sort of Singapore is probably one of the most advanced areas in this whole thing. So certainly good reason to look there. The challenge is, of course, that we have good legislation and that we have good legislators. I mean, the issue here is exactly understanding the challenges of tech and that sort of tech savviness, and that translational problem of translating what tech does into legislation and impact and so forth requires good legislators. So sort of promoting the general understanding of tech is extremely important and will of course be a challenge for legislation going forward.
Thank you, Søren. And then I think I'll jump to my colleague Mads here, because keeping charge of our networking platform where it's also possible to ask questions. And I think we have a number of questions coming in actually.
Yeah, we have a few questions. The first one is more in regards of the startup side from Copenhagen Fintech's own Oliver Sjøstad, who's our head of startup growth. And he's asking the speakers here, what is an ethical overstep fintechs make today that you would advise entrepreneurs to be extra worried about?
Maybe so. I can maybe start on that. So I think that when we look on the industry, when we look on how organizations start using AI, they often, you could say, they use it or data science in general, use it in a Wild West kind of setup. So, and what do I mean by that? It's that, they experiment and do some things, and then hopefully it works, and then they start using it. So I think that first of all, data scientists are quite well advised to look more on, standard software development processes, and then also use tools that are a bit motivated by supporting these processes. And then obviously in addition to that comes all this covering of the governance and regulatory aspects, like some frameworks that help the measuring model bias, that help measuring or tracking where does data come from, and to also measure who has retrained the model, when, what kind of accuracy, and so forth, so that all that is also kind of documented.
Great. Any take on that, Søren, Hannah?
I was just going to add that we have these sandboxes, and sandboxes are used not just in Singapore, but they actually help at least mitigate that kind of activity to a minimum. But it's one thing to want to join a sandbox, even if there is one set up, because some young entrepreneurs actually think that they can just do it out on their own.
Mm.
Cool. Sorry, Søren.
No, sorry. I agree. This sandbox concept is extremely useful. My experience is that startups are actually very good at being mindful and attentive to those risks that comes out of the environment where you are tech savvy and you know what might go wrong. And the risk exactly is that in a growth phase you take chances, or you don't sort of build in the kinds of checks and balances that you need from the beginning, simply from a resource perspective. You don't have access to necessary legal expertise or GDPR knowledge or whatever as you build your product. And the big risk is, of course, that you haven't been ethical by design, that you haven't sort of built in the checks and balances from the beginning, that you just pile up data in a room because you might need it somewhere down the road. So you'll keep it, and you're not really sort of attentive to how you actually store and what you do with that data.
Cool. I think we have time for one quick question more.
Yeah, we have one more question from Andrea Kate, who is the Managing Director of Future Proofing Next. And her question, mind you that I will describe it if you don't know what it is. What are people's views on Eric Ries's long-term stock exchange opening up in regards of companies providing value over the long term rather than quarterly? So if you don't know this, I will read her description about it. Does anyone of the speakers know Eric Ries and his long-term stock exchange?
I think it's good for the audience also perhaps to read it out loud.
Sure.
Yeah,
I'm just reading Andrea's description here. So modern companies measure progress over decades, not financial quarters. Investors who invest long-term want to know not just how companies plan to produce value in the next quarter, but for years to come. Employees, customers, suppliers, and communities count on companies to uphold their commitments and do right by society. Our vision is a public market that supports investment, experimentation, and scaling that companies can use to find continuous success, one that can open the way for innovation and value creation into the future. So basically, they want to create a stock exchange where you don't have reports based on quarterly results, but on long-term results.
I'll shoot the ball out to you, Hannah, and then afterwards Søren, and then Bjørn for a closing statement on that one. Thanks, Andrea.
Yeah, for me, if we're talking about non-reporting, shareholders will not like that right now, and the regulators will not like that. And if you wanted to create such a system, you need to get enough buy-in. And I think that may be very difficult on the whole, especially for large institutional investors. Thanks.
Søren, quick one.
I think it's an extremely good question. Thank you, Andrea, for that, because it goes to the. I agree that there are challenges, but it goes to the point of this sort of dimension in time, sort of the short-term focus on profit and the impact on the stock and the value of the company, and the more long-term considerations that are important for the company, and that's an extremely important and difficult balance to find, of course.
Yeah. I think that me being a value investor myself, I have full buy-in into the long view, but I would also add that this might be quite challenging in the current market setting, and what institutional investors and other players in the market look out for. So yeah.
All right. So and on that note, I think I'll end this day's session. Remember, tomorrow there's the Big Bang. We start 8:45 and kick off the next 2 days for our main conference. Just a thank you very much to our panel for joining us here. Hannah, I would say you can go to bed now. Søren, you can get up. So thank you very much for joining us so early or so late. It was a huge honor to have you on the panel, and a great debate. I'm very happy about that. Thank you, Bjørn. And also, while we are actually thanking, just a quick thank you to actually our sponsors that made this event possible. I will be signing off now. We will be signing off now, and hopefully we will see a lot of you tomorrow morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you.